Andrea and Duzor, and I'm a chemistry professor at Chicago State University. I'm interested in how students connect theory and practice. I think that's probably where most of my research focus and most of my sort of intellectual curiosity. And in that sense, teaching an online course is challenging for me because it would not be my first choice of how to interact with students, because I think it is more difficult to make those connections between theory and practice when everything is asynchronous. However, I think online courses are sort of here to stay, and so trying to find best practices within that genre is important.
My name is Cornelius. I am a senior here at Chicago State. Currently, my major is in psychology, but I also take courses in the STEM department as well, chemistry courses specifically. I chose to be in LA because I think that student learning is important. I think that we are revolutionizing the way that students learn. And as I go forward, I am interested in pursuing that in grad school. So learning online has always kind of been a great way for me to take courses that I would not have otherwise been able to take. And now I teach online courses or co-teach or help develop them. So that is pretty much me.
The course that I teach online is called Critical Thinking in Science and Technology. It's primarily a course for non-majors to fill general education requirements and critical thinking requirements. However, occasionally STEM majors take it as well for those critical thinking requirements. The nature of the course looks at modules around somewhat contentious issues in science. We read a lot of popular science press articles from the New Scientist, Scientific American, Discover, periodicals such as that. And students have to try to really dig deeply to understand pro and against arguments and come to their own ideas while learning some science content along the way.
Definitely. I think that the really interesting part about the critical thinking course is that, it's not necessarily about the answer that students get, more so about the process that they take to fully understand the concepts and kind of derive scientific thinking from what otherwise would have been just saying, oh, well, I found this out online. I think the critical thinking course kind of has the objective to just get everyone thinking about what is science, how is science applicable to my life, whether or not I'm a STEM major or not. So I think that in the course we try to assist students in thinking about new ways to kind of approach problems, and that kind of transcends into whatever major they have.
I was excited about the idea of having an LA in the online class. I've had LAs in my in-person general chemistry classes and physical science courses for elementary majors before, and I know how effective LAs can be in helping students feel engaged, learn the content more deeply, and feel part of a community. The online course, I think it's more difficult to establish those community norms. It's more difficult to get students really working together rather than working individually parallel. And I thought, oh, an LA is going to help me do this. And I think we got further along that pathway. There's still more ways I'd like to try to make online classes more interactive and more engaging, but I think it helped in that.
Working with Dr. Duzor was definitely a great experience just because it was also my first semester being in LA. But I think that, the class not being online, not being in person was definitely a challenge for me to kind of create relationships with members of the class that I would not have been able to create in person, just because people are normally going about their days or doing what they have to do. The cool thing about being an online LA is that, students will come to you on their own time, and then you're able to help them a little bit more deeply than I think you would just, in 30 minutes in person or anything like that. So for me, it wasn't necessarily an obstacle to be an online LA. I actually really enjoyed it. So
So in trying to decide how an LA would work within an online environment, I had some ideas going into it of ways that I wanted Trell to work in the classroom. And one of them was to be involved in discussion forums. We have a lot of discussion forums about different articles, and that he could be another voice to help direct those conversations. That isn't just students talking to the instructor, but to try to get it to be students talking to each other. And I had some ideas of using him to do peer review for students when they would turn their papers in, that they would have the option that Trell could look at them first, give them some critical feedback before they were turned into me. And I think that is useful both in the sense of he is more of a peer of them and can provide more true peer review, and also just in a logistical standpoint. I can't grade everyone's paper twice. And I don't think that kind of goes against the LA standpoint against grading, because he wasn't grading, he was giving sort of critical friend feedback. As we kind of moved along over the course of the semester, Charles started taking more initiative to provide more generalized feedback to the class of things that he had noticed in the forums that people were missing, or how they weren't answering questions to the full extent possible, and would kind of create sort of a tips of the day that we could post online. And that I think was helpful both because it again gave more feedback. There's also this idea that if I say something and then Charles says it as well, we mean it. Right. And students kind of pick up a little bit on that reading.
Trell came up with some advice for students regarding forum discussions. Make sure you're reading all the articles. When you respond to your peers, make sure it is not the first time you're seeing the information. Simply saying whether or not two peers agree is not adequate. Ensure that your response contains all the information asked of you. Stick around. Activeness in the forum will create rich discussions. Here are some of the possible roles of an LA in an online class. They can edit student work and provide peer review, develop materials to encourage and support student engagement, communicate with students through various online platforms, keep track of weekly objectives and online student progress, and provide detailed feedback for online student submissions. The following clip is from one of the weekly preparation sessions. During these sessions, Trell and Andrea meet to discuss how best to support students in the class.
But a lot of people are starting to email me back in regards to like the email that I sent them. Mm-hmm. And it was just general tips like make sure that your slides meet the number required, slides. Make sure that your paper has scholar resources. You can go from these websites and just literally copy and paste it, that you use for relevant articles. And yeah, that's pretty much the general tone of the email. Just make sure that you cite your sources for whatever you use. Even if you use an idea from someone else, make sure you still cite it.
Which is definitely the thing they have the most trouble understanding.
Yep, exactly. And then two, I wanted them to understand also that it's okay to have a position. I prepared a paper, I think it was from Michael, and his positions were questioned. And it's like, well, this isn't really a position, you're asking me a question, So just helping them understand that.
As we go back to the interview with Trell and Andrea, Trell describes some of the rich interactions he is able to have with students in the online course.
The students that came to me definitely expressed that, they didn't want to sound stupid, for lack of better words. And I think that, having an LA in a course allows them to kind of have a go-to person before they contact the instructor. A lot of the students who came to me expressed, well, this is what I've been thinking for my issue review paper, which they have to do weekly. And they would say, oh, well, can you give me some ideas about how to better approach this particular topic? And from those students, I was able to kind of develop, as Dr. Van Duzer said, tips for the rest of the class. But I think that the most important part of that was that the students kind of had someone who they didn't feel intimidated, even though Dr. Van Duzer is an intimidating person, you know, just the title, I think, of professor kind of caused them to be a little bit weary about contacting her for advice or, you know, for review. And I think that having an LA was both beneficial for her and also beneficial for me as someone who is interested in education and helping students learn. I think that it was a really great development piece of the program.
And one of the other nice feedbacks parts with having an LA and online course is because you don't have that immediate interaction with your students. I would sometimes wonder, am I asking too much? Did I assign too many meetings? And Cheryl would say, no, you're fine. And that was nice. And another thing that an online LA can do that's really helpful is I would put together the whole course modules, and I've built them, so I know what they should be. Before they would go live, Trell would go through and click on the links and make sure they all directed correctly, but also make sure that you know, my directions for part 2 made sense for somebody who hadn't been breathing making the module. And that was really helpful and helped us fix a few errors before things went live.
In the following excerpt from the weekly preparation session, Trell presents some ideas about engaging students in supplemental questions to scaffold their thinking.
I think this week, though, I'm gonna just browse through the topics and kind of develop like 4 to 6 questions per topic. That way I can kind of like shoot questions to, you know, them if people don't, you know. So yeah, that's all I have.
It might be good if you, let's say you figure out 3 questions you want to ask for each one.
Mm-hmm.
Put just one to start, and
Right.
then see if people kick in, and then if they're not.
Right. Okay, definitely. I was just planning to have them by the 18th. That way, when people start putting in responses, I can just post one up, and then I can have a couple of, you know, on standby.
Yeah.
In the following section, Andrea and Trell offer suggestions to instructors using LAs in online courses. They contrast the in-person and online environments and discuss how involving an LA in online courses can reduce instructor isolation and increase student engagement in the online setting.
I think some of my suggestions for faculty who's looking at using an LA in an online course is firstly, just like using an LA in an in-person course, you need to have rich questions to discuss. In an online course, you have to have rich questions to discuss. And that's really important, because what we're trying to do is facilitate peer-to-peer dialogue. That's what an LA is doing in an online environment, just like they're doing in an in-person environment. After that, I think it's a point of sort of structuring how you're going to have students talk about those rich questions. And we mostly use discussion forums, although there's probably other ways you could do that as well. One thing that I think is important about using LAs and online courses, and Charlie, you were talking about this earlier, is the need for self-discipline. And an LA who's in your class, you have your weekly meeting, they show up, they've done what they need to do. And I think one of the things, the first maybe week or two, we were sorting that out. It was sort of like, well, wait, what does count as fulfilling the requirements of being an LA? And once we kind of had that settled down, that these are the objectives that you need to complete, and sort of this is your time commitment, I think things went really smoothly, and luckily Charlie was really good at self-discipline, and was able to fulfill that. But I think that's when you're looking at characteristics of an LA that you need, that's particularly important characteristic for an LA in an online class.
In order to be an effective LA, you need to be effectively flexible. I think it's a really good way to say it. You are going to have students who email you at the last minute. You're going to have students who, no matter how you explain it, will not understand. But, you have to take it upon yourself to, at times, go above and beyond. I think is the defining factor of an LA in an online course, simply because you don't have that in-person connection with another individual, especially one of your college peers. Just ensure that you are going above and beyond in any way that is possible for you. And yeah, it will.
To support LAs in online courses, Trell developed something called the Cougar rubric. Contact. Establish relationships with the students. Let them know who you are and what you are about. Include the date the student was contacted and when you replied. Organize. Once your student responds, they will have various questions, problems, concerns. Write these down along with the date that the student reached out. Understand. If you do not understand a question that a student is asking, ask for clarification. If it is a content issue, write down their questions as well as your questions and discuss with the course instructor. Gather. LAs facilitate learning experiences. Once you have a firm understanding of what your students need, begin to gather resources that will assist them in reaching their learning goals. Achieve. Document student success. If they do not reach out to you, reach out to them. It's okay to congratulate them on excellent work. It is also helpful to determine areas where they need assistance. Reinforce. Once you and your students find a system that works, continue to use it. Reinforce positive behaviors and encourage early submissions, peer review, and other activities. In this next section, Trell describes a specific example of how he supported a student in the online course using the Cougar rubric.
A specific incident where a student was struggling with a particular idea would be when a student approached me about their issue review paper. They did not know how to structure it in a way that was scientific. It was more subjective and opinionated. And they felt as though, the issues that were presented for the week were very confusing for them. So, as an LA, my responsibility was first to read the weekly material and make sure that I understood it. If I didn't understand it, I would contact Dr. Van Duzor. But, the main piece was emailing it back and forth with her. She was able to send me her paper and I would just pull up a Word document and go through and edit it. I found that providing just general advice about, hey, you said, I think that this is, are you able to cite it with the source? If you aren't able to cite it with the source, maybe you should do a little bit more research about the claims that you're making. And I think that, just going through her paper, sort of with a fine-tooth comb, kind of allow her to say, okay, well, this is what I'm doing wrong. These are suggestions for how I can possibly do it better. And from that point on, she was a stronger writer in the course. And she kind of came back to me. So, a part of that is also establishing a relationship with the student. She came back to me and her papers were continuously better. And I think that she ended up doing well in the course as well. So, as an LA, you won't always know what you'll be doing, but you just have to be very flexible in, attempting to help students.
One way Trell helps students in the online class is by developing materials to support their understanding of weekly course objectives.
So I'm using Prezi currently to develop weekly objective reports, and it's just to keep the students engaged. I could have used the PowerPoint or pretty much any other media outlet, but I chose Prezi just because of the nature of the course, and I want to keep them engaged while they are sort of debriefing for the week. When they, at the beginning of each week, my professor posts, hey, Trell completed a Prezi to discuss what the objectives were, whether or not we all met them, and how we can go and proceed into the new week, thinking of ways that we can continuously meet and exceed objectives. So that's currently what I'm using Prezi for.
Andrea describes how the lack of interaction with students is one of the biggest challenges in an online class. Having an LA in this course helped her feel more engaged and not feel as lonely.
Taught the online course without an LA, and then I've taught the online course with an LA. I think the biggest difference for me is the feedback. In an in-person class, there's an immediate feedback of a student going and engaging more, or going, and I need to be able to regulate my instruction that way. And online, that's much more difficult, both because it's less personal and it's asynchronous, and so you're not getting that. Here's a question. Oh, 2 days later, there's an answer. But with working with Trell, because we could talk about it, I had more feedback about what was going on, and it also made me feel less lonely in the course, and that was nice as well. So I think it helped me be more engaged with the course because it was more interaction for me.
It was a lot of fun.